Thank you. So let me start with a brief recapitulation of what we saw in the first half. So we started, well, we did not start, but we defined the fusion product. So the fusion product originally was defined as constraints coming from the presence of null vectors. So constraints in particular on operator product expansions. So we know that if we compute an operator product expansion involving a degenerate field, V21 operator product expansion with some non-degenerate field, what can appear here are just two possible primary fields with momentums P plus minus B over 2. So we know it, for example, from the BPZ equation, or we also know it from directly studying this three-point function, for example, Vp, Vp prime. So that would be non-zero only if P prime equals P plus or minus B over 2. So this motivates us to define a formal product of representations such that the degenerate representation, which corresponds to this degenerate field, a product with a Verma module, which corresponds to this field, should be the sum of two Verma modules, Vp plus B over 2, Vp minus B over 2. So far it's just a definition, but then we can assume that this fusion product is associative, and by assuming it is associative, we can compute repeated fusion products, and in particular fusion products of degenerate representations. And in particular, we can characterize the degenerate representations as the representations such that fusion with a Verma module gives you here a finite sum. So in particular, if we fuse 2 times with the degenerate representation, we find finitely many terms, and by associativity, this means that this fusion product of degenerate representations must itself be a degenerate representation, or more precisely, it has to be actually a sum of 2 degenerate representations, and we can find which degenerate representations by using the constraints from, again, from symmetry on this OPE of 2 degenerate fields with one another. So in this case, we found that this R21 times R21 had to be, well, R11 plus R13. And by repeating this, we could get the infinite family of degenerate representations. Okay, so now we found also that degenerate representations are not enough to build minimal models. We needed extra constraints. So for that, we introduced doubly degenerate representations. So the idea was, in an example, that if I'm assuming that a representation is doubly degenerate, so R21 equals R13. And now let me give a more algebraic interpretation of this equality. So I'm starting by assuming actually that the degenerate representations match, degenerate dimensions match, which actually happens only for specific values of the central charge. But let's assume we have this matching. What it means, so let me call this dimension delta. It means that we have a Verma module starting with the primary state of dimension delta. And this Verma module somewhere has 2 null vectors. Well, somewhere. Well, one null vector at level 2 here, which generates its own Verma submodule, and one null vector at level 3 here, which generates its own Verma submodule. So, in principle, I could define 4 different representations here. This Verma module here, or, so let me call it V delta, or I could mod out by whatever is generated by this null vector, so that would be V delta over V delta plus 2, or I could mod out by the modules generated by this null vector, so that would be V delta over V delta plus 3, or I could even mod out by these 2 submodules, assuming, therefore, that the 2 null vectors vanish, and that would be V delta over V delta plus 2 plus V delta plus 3. It's not a direct sum, because actually these 2 submodules overlap. And that's what I'm doing here. By writing this equality, I'm essentially taking a representation R where these two null vectors vanish. And if the two null vectors vanish, it means that when I do fusion of R with itself, I need to obey the constraints from each one of these null vectors. So the constraints from the first null vector give me that R times R should be R11, R11 plus R31. That's what I would obtain in general from fusion of this R21 with itself. The constraints from this second null vector gives me R11 plus R13 plus R15. But R times R should be the same, meaning it should obey both constraints, and which means that everything that does not appear in both lines is eliminated, is forbidden by symmetry and the presence of null vectors. Which means that R times R is actually nothing more than R11. And it shows that having a doubly degenerate representations indeed makes fusion more restrictive and gives us a chance of building minimal models.
I have a very stupid question. The fact that that's not a direct sum is not an issue when you model?
The fact that what?
That you don't have a direct sum between these two sub-modules.
Yeah, so the question is, yeah, the fact that I don't have a direct sum, well, is not an issue. I'm just taking the sum, and that's still a submodule, and I can mod out by this submodule. It only becomes an issue if you try to compute the character of this representation. Because if you do that, you cannot just subtract the sum of the characters of these sub-representations because you would subtract too much, and you have to add what you have wrongly subtracted, and it goes on to infinity, actually. But algebraically, for defining this module, and also for finding the constraints from null vectors, for finding fusion rules, it's not a problem. Yes? Yes. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I did not even use all the constraints because indeed, when I write the first representation as 2-1 and the second as well, the first instance as 2-1 and the second instance as 1-3, I would get extra constraints. Actually, if you look up the fusion product here, you would find R23. So now it looks like we have eliminated everything, and because this looks different from R11, but actually it's not different from R11, because if you have this coincidence of dimensions, delta 2-1 equals delta 1-3, you also have delta 1-1 equals delta 2-3. So actually this R23 coincides with R11. Okay, so no more questions? Okay, then let's come back to our ansatz for the spectrum of minimal models. So the ansatz that's written here, SPQ. Okay, so the question is whether this is really a consistent CFT, whether there exists a consistent CFT with this spectrum, and in particular, whether this spectrum is closed under fusion. So we have to compute the fusion rules of these doubly degenerate representations, actually just in the same way as we computed the fusion here of this doubly degenerate representation in this example. So where do we start? Well, we start again from the general fusion rules of degenerate representations, which I'm going to rewrite. R1 S1, R2 S2 equals sum, R equals R1 minus R2 plus 1 by steps of 2. S equals S1 minus S2 plus 1 by steps of 2, up to R1 plus R2 minus 1. RRS. So that would be for any central charge. But now we have to add extra constraints from these doubly degenerate representations. And that's an exercise. So let me write in red what changes when I add the extra constraints. Well, of course, I should find fewer representations in this fusion product. And what happens is that these upper bounds here get modified. So this upper bound becomes the mean of R1 plus R2, 2p minus R1 minus R2 minus 1. And this upper bound here becomes the mean of S1 plus S2, 2q minus S1 minus S2 minus 1. And that would be for C equals CPQ, for this specific rational value of the central charge, assuming also the representations are doubly degenerate. So RRS equals R P minus R Q minus S. So this result, if you prove it, that's an exercise, I mean, though this result shows actually that this cat table is stable under fusion, because here this upper bound is always less or equal than the upper bound of the cat table, here p minus 1. So let me write that. So this upper bound, mean of R1 plus R2, 2p minus R1 minus R2 minus 1 is always less or equal than p minus 1. So the cat table is stable. So this spectrum is a good candidate for the spectrum of a minimal model. Now, maybe one more comment on these fusion rules of minimal models. Well, you see, these fusion rules become more complicated when the central charge becomes rational. For generic central charge, the fusion rules don't depend at all on the central charge. Well, of course, the fusion rules are discrete objects, and the central charge is a continuous parameter, so it's really impossible to have a dependence on the central charge here. But when you specialize the central charge, you get some dependence. The central charge appears through this P here and Q there. And the fusion rules become more complicated. So, but still, it can be a good idea to study these generalized minimal models at generic central charge with these fusion rules, because essentially you can recover minimal models by taking the limit when the central charge is rational. So let me give, to conclude, an example of a minimal model. So that would be the Ising model, or more specifically, the two-dimensional critical Ising model. So that's PQ equals 4, 3. Central charge is 1/2. And the cat table, well, let's write it as a table. So R here, S, R is 1, 2, or 3. S is 1 or 2. And let me write in this table the conformal dimensions. So here, the field with dimension delta 1, 1. Well, delta 1, 1 is 0. That's always true. But in this case, delta 1, 1 is also delta 3, 2. So we have a 0 here as well. Delta 1, 2 is the same as delta 3, 1, and it's 1/2. So we have a 1/2 there. And delta 2, 2 is the same as delta 2, 1, and that's 1/16. And yeah, so that's, if you want, the simplest, really non-trivial minimal model out of an infinite family. Okay. So are there questions on minimal models? Yes?
So to what extent, if you know that some CFT has some finite spectrum and you know a given rational particular charge, do you know that it's unique, that it has to be this minimal model, or can it be presented something else?
Yeah, so the question is whether if I know the central charge and if I know the spectrum, my CFT has to be the minimal model. The answer is yes. Essentially, the crossing symmetry is constraining enough that you don't have the choice. But you really have to make sure that you have this spectrum and nothing more.
How can we see from the crossing equation that the solution is unique once you plug in the spectrum?
So the question is, how do I know that the solution of crossing equation is unique? We will see this essentially when we study Liouville theory. But the basic idea is that if you have these fusion rules, let's say R21 times RRS equals R minus 1S plus R plus 1S. So it means that the crossing symmetry of a 4-point function that involves V21 and VRS and some other fields will give us a relation between structure constants at different parameters. So the structure constant here for a field with parameters R minus 1S and some other fields divided by the structure constant for the field with parameters R plus 1S and some other fields. Well, this ratio is related to the ratio that we saw in this crossing symmetry of a 4-point function, and you know it. So essentially, you know what happens if R is shifted by 2 units.
But can it be that there are two different solutions with different asymptotics that obey the same equation?
No, at this point, I mean, this equation is really fixed. So here you know this ratio. So you know how the structure constants change when R is shifted by 2 and also when S is shifted by 2. So basically, the only thing you can do is to take a sub-model of your minimal model. So to take a subset of representations that is stable under fusion, well, you can do that and to consider just this sub-model. But that's a really rather trivial case of having a different solution. Well, the simplest submodel you could take is the model with just the identity. So you could take as a spectrum R11 times R bar 11. So all correlation functions are 1, and there you have your trivial model. But okay, it's not interesting. Okay, so yes?
Given a C, P and Q are not always fixed, right? You can have various combinations of P and Q.
So given the central charge, can I change P and Q? Well,
Not exchange, there can be more pairs of P and Q.
yes, so indeed, I have assumed that P and Q were coprime. But if I lift this assumption, I could have the same central charge. Well, what matters is essentially B squared, which is minus Q over P. So if I change, let's say, if I take the pair 2P, 2Q, I could indeed try to build some CFT with more representations than the minimal model. And actually, I don't know really what would happen. I doubt it would be very interesting, but I can't prove it. Okay. So now, let's do some modular bootstrap. So the modular bootstrap can be understood as a way to escape the complexity of the crossing symmetry equation. I mean, the crossing symmetry equation is difficult because it involves an infinite sum. It involves not only the spectrum, but also the 3-point structure constants. The modular bootstrap, by definition, is to study not the 4-point function on the sphere, not this complicated object, but the 0-point function on the torus, which is the same as the partition function on the torus. And this makes things much simpler because this quantity depends only on the spectrum, not on the structure constants. And when you decompose it into conformal blocks, instead of our rather complicated 4-point blocks, you get characters of representations. So objects that are much simpler than 4-point conformal blocks. So that makes this modular bootstrap technically simpler than the crossing symmetry itself. However, okay, the simplicity of the modular bootstrap comes with a cost, and the cost is that, well, you lose some information, and you're not sure that you end up with a consistent conformal field theory. So this modular invariance. So modular invariance is the condition, is a non-trivial condition on this partition function. So the condition which is, if you want, analogous to crossing symmetry of the 4-point function. But this modular invariance is not sufficient for having a consistent theory. So actually, to have a consistent conformal field theory on Riemann surfaces of all genus, you need much more than just modular invariance. You need crossing symmetry on the sphere, and that's not a consequence of modular invariance. And you need modular invariance, but not of the partition function, but of the torus 1-point function. And if you have that, essentially you have a consistent conformal field theory on all Riemann surfaces. So that's the result of Moore and Seiberg, which is originally true for rational conformal field theories, but it's suspected to be essentially true for also some non-rational conformal field theories. Sorry, yes. Good question. What is a rational conformal field theory? So a rational conformal field theory is a theory whose spectrum is made of a finite sum of irreducible representations, or maybe not necessarily reducible, a finite sum of indecomposable representations, let's say. Okay. So, and I would also say that modular invariance of the torus partition function is not even necessary, because you may be interested in CFTs that exist just on the plane, on the sphere, but not on the torus. So what is this torus partition function, and what is modular invariance? Well, the torus, if you want, is the complex plane divided by some lattice, z plus tau z. Tau is some parameter, if you want, the modulus. So, therefore, the partition function on the torus is a function of tau. It's a partition function. It's a correlation function of zero fields. So you don't have positions of fields, you don't have dimensions of fields, you just have the geometry of the torus. It's a function of the geometry. But then there is some redundancy in this parametrization of the torus. And I get the same torus if I replace tau by a tau plus b over c tau plus d, where a, b, c, d are integers such that a, d minus b, c is not zero. So this condition is modular invariance. Yes. well, actually, this group SL2Z of two-dimensional matrices with integer coefficients is generated by just two elements. So we can restrict to the element T of tau equals tau plus 1 and S of tau equals minus 1 over tau. So this modular invariance boils down to Z of tau equals Z of tau plus 1 equals Z of minus 1 over tau. So now I claim that now the partition function was could be computed from the spectrum of my CFT, and well, the formula for that is that Z of tau is the trace over the spectrum of Q to the L0 minus C over 24, Q bar to the L0 bar minus C over 24. Well, I'm introducing here a parameter Q, which is e to the 2 pi I tau. So that's really the non-trivial formula here, and let's give some justification for this formula. So basically, the idea that you have to trace over some powers of L0, something to the L0 or L0 bar has its roots in the interpretation as L0 and L0 bar as Hamiltonians, as time translation operators. So if you take your torus here, you have translation in one direction, which could be, let's say, L0 minus L0 bar could generate this translation, and the other translation could be generated by L0 plus L0 bar. And then you have to translate in this direction or in this direction by a certain amount, depending on the parameter tau, in order to build your torus. So tracing over the spectrum is equivalent to essentially cutting your torus by inserting your spectrum here. So we are, So let's say the least trivial piece of this formula is why I am shifting by C over 24 here. And I don't think I will give a detailed explanation. There is a geometrical picture in the lecture notes. The basic idea is that this L0 and L0 bar are interpreted as translations or dilations in the plane. But then I have to build my torus from the plane by some conformal transformation. And in this conformal transformation, the L0 and L0 bar don't transform completely into themselves, but they pick these terms minus C over 24. Okay, but we could take this as a definition almost of the torus partition function. And now I propose to look at the consequences of modular invariance of this partition function, the consequences on the spectrum, because now we want to find constraints on this spectrum from this modular invariance. So are there questions? Okay, so, first let's start with this T transformation. Tau goes to tau plus 1. So the invariance Z of tau equals Z of tau plus 1 means that L0 minus L0 bar is integer, or if you want, has integer eigenvalues. Because if you have Q equals exponential 2 pi I tau, well, that's written here. If you do tau goes to tau plus 1, you get here a factor of essentially, you get L0, and you have it with a minus sign on the right. You get a factor exponential 2 pi I L0 minus L0 bar in this product here. So this factor has to be 1, so L0 minus L0 bar has to be integer. Well, we already had the constraint that the left minus the right dimensions were half integer due to single valueness of correlation functions, and here we get a slightly stronger constraint that it's actually integer.
The 1/16, how it will ever be okay with that?
Well, 1/16, I mean, you see, here we have studied diagonal minimal models. So we had the same dimension on the left and on the right. So implicitly here, it was delta bar, the right dimension, was also 1/16. So in this case of a diagonal minimal model, we had L0 equals L0 bar. Okay. So that's easy enough constraint. So let's consider the more complicated constraint that z of tau equals z of minus 1 over tau. Well, to consider this constraint, we have to look a bit at this partition function and decompose it into characters of representations. So let's assume the spectrum. Well, let me take for simplicity a diagonal spectrum, although I could take also non-diagonal, but it would just be a bit more complicated. So spectrum is a sum of R times R bar, so a diagonal spectrum. And if I'm inserting this spectrum here, what do I obtain? Well, this trace will factorize into left movers and right movers, so I get z of tau equals the sum over R of trace over R Q C L0 minus C over 24, trace over R bar of Q bar L0 bar minus C over 24. Now, these quantities, let me call them characters, chi R of Q, and here chi R bar, well, chi R, actually, it's the same representation on the left and on the right, but chi R of Q bar. Well, okay, actually it would be simpler if I wrote these characters as functions not of Q but of tau, because it's tau that has a relatively simple transformation. And here is not tau, but it's not tau bar, but it's minus tau bar, because when I conjugate Q, tau picks a minus sign. So if I want this equation, modular invariance, to be satisfied, well, the modular transformations of characters need to be linear combinations of characters. So I need to have a relation of the type chi R equals sum R prime of S R R prime chi R prime of tau. And now I must really apologize because I'm using the S for too many things. So S here is called the modular S matrix. S here is the spectrum, and I also have an S which is this transformation. But okay, I hope you will not be too confused. So let's assume then that we have such a relation, and if we insert it into this partition function, well, we'll obtain the following: z of tau equals sum R prime R second. Yes?
Are you assuming that relation, or are you proving that it's a consequence of z of tau equals z of minus 1 over tau?
Yes, well, it's a consequence, but provided we make extra assumptions, like we restrict to some class of representations. So here, for simplicity, let's say I prefer to assume it. So I want to modular transform my left-moving and right-moving characters, so I get a sum over R and R prime of S R R prime, S R R second. Well, let's say I'm computing z of minus 1 over tau. I still have a sum over R, actually, and then I get these characters, R prime, of tau, chi, R second of minus tau bar. And of course, this has to coincide with the original z of minus 1 over tau, which I could rewrite as just sum over R of chi R of minus 1 over tau, chi R of minus 1 over tau bar. Well, maybe plus 1 over tau bar. Sorry, now I get mixed up. No, sorry, I'm just rewriting it as my original definition here, so that here I'm writing two expressions in terms of the same characters. So the outcome is that for them to match, assuming the characters are independent, which they are, we need the sum of R over R of SRR prime, SRR second, should be delta R prime R second. In other words, the S matrix times the transpose matrix should be the identity matrix. Okay, so is this a difficult condition to obey? Well, actually, by definition, I mean, since this transformation, tau goes to minus 1 over tau is involutive, I always have S squared, the squared of the S matrix is identity. So given a matrix whose square is identity, if I want it to obey this condition, I just need, well, it becomes equivalent to S being equals to S transpose, to S being symmetric. Yes?
So are you assuming that the S matrix is real here? Because otherwise it should be S, and there should be another complex conjugate on the right moving S matrix.
Yeah, so the question is whether I'm assuming that the S matrix is real here. Otherwise, I need to put complex conjugates everywhere. Wait, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think the complex conjugates are essentially in this, acting on this tau parameter, but a priori, there is no reason to put complex conjugates.
The S matrix acting on the right moving character is also complex conjugate, which is everything is complex conjugate. In general, S squared is not the identity, but the charge conjugation matrix.
So in general, S squared is the charge conjugation. Yeah, I see you're very interested in this issue, because if I say wrong things, then you have to correct them in your own lecture.
Of course, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay, so let's indeed assume we are in a case where, in particular, all conformal dimensions are real, and so then the multiplicities are real, so the only thing that gets conjugated is tau. Okay, so S should be symmetric, and the question is whether minimal models are modular invariant. And then, therefore, we have to compute their S matrix. So, to conclude the lecture, let's not really compute it. That's a relatively complicated exercise, but let's give an idea of how it can be computed. Because what appears in minimal models are these quite complicated doubly degenerate representations. And to compute their characters is quite complicated. So let's start with Verma modules. Can we compute the character of a Verma module? So the character of a Verma module V delta. Well, let's call it V delta. So let's call it chi delta of tau. So that's the trace over the Verma module of Q to the L0 minus C over 24. So what is L0 in a Verma module? Well, L0 equals delta. Well, we have delta for the primary state, and then if we act with L minus 1, we get delta plus 1, of course. So this starts with q to the delta minus c over 24 plus q to the delta plus 1 minus c over 24 plus some corrections. So if, assuming for the moment that my Virasoro algebra had just this creation mode, L minus 1, well, I could just get one state at each level by acting each time with L minus 1. So I would get a prefactor, q delta minus c over 24, and I would get 1 plus q squared, etc. So that would be q to the delta minus c over 24 over 1 minus q. But of course, I don't just have the L minus 1, I also have L minus 2, except that L minus 2 jumps 2 levels each time. And it turns out that the contribution of this action of L minus 2 is just, well, something like 1 plus q squared plus q fourth plus q6. So therefore, the character is q to the delta minus c over 24 over 1 minus q, a 1 minus q squared for L minus 2, and then there is a 1 minus q cubed for L minus 3, etc. And then let's rewrite this in terms of standard special functions. Let's do that here. So let's rewrite delta as q squared over 4 minus p squared. Q squared over 4 is c minus 1 over 24. So delta minus c over 24 is minus 1 over 24 minus p squared. So the character chi delta of tau is q to the minus p squared over eta of tau, where eta is the Dedekind eta function. It is just q to the 1 over 24 product n equals 1 to infinity of 1 minus q to the n. So let me write its name here. The Dedekind eta function. So I'm almost done here. Well, I'm almost done with what I can quickly and easily write on the blackboard, at any rate. I mean, the difficult part is for you as an exercise. Now we want characters of degenerate representations. So if the central charge was generic, and we would consider just a simply degenerate representation, that would be quite easy, because the structure of a simply degenerate representation is just a coset of a Verma module by another Verma module. So this degenerate representation is just V delta RS divided by V delta RS plus RS. Well, it's better to write it in terms of momentum, so VPRS, and actually that's VPR minus S. So the character of these degenerate representations is just the difference of the characters of these two Verma modules. So they have this eta function in the denominator. Well, I define it as eta of tau, yeah. And then on the numerator, you have chi minus p squared rs, a q to the minus p squared rs, minus q to the p squared r minus s. So that's simple enough, but that's true only for these simply degenerate representations. So in minimal models, we have doubly degenerate representations. And as we saw a few minutes ago, they have a rather complicated structure because they are not just cosets of a direct sum of two Verma modules, but you have to take a coset with two Verma modules that overlap. So the structure of the character is more complicated. I will not write it here. But the outcome is that if you compute these characters, and then if you compute their modular transformation, you find indeed that the S matrix is symmetric, which shows that minimal models are modular invariant. And actually, they are not just modular invariant, they are actually consistent on all on all Riemann surfaces. So that was for diagonal minimal models. And next time, maybe we'll have a look at non-diagonal minimal models too. So, other questions?
So this stronger condition that you got from the down close to top on one transformation, that L minus L bar should be integer, could it be relaxed by introducing in a sense some sort of fermions in the study?
Yeah.
In fact, all integers.
Yeah, the question is whether the condition that L0 minus L0 bar is integer could be relaxed. I guess so, but I'm not very familiar with that. I mean, you have fermionic minimal models, but I'm not sure if they are indeed consistent on the torus or not. But they were studied by Petkova a long time ago. Yes?
So you're assuming like independence of these characters. So if I had like two copies of the same representation, this wouldn't be the case.
If you have 2 times the same representation, you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I'm assuming indeed that the characters are independent, and what would happen if I had several copies of the same representation? Well, essentially it would mean that the constraints for modular invariance would be weaker. So in minimal models, well, they are minimal not just because they have this finite number of representations, but also because each representation appears just once. Well, okay, that's not completely true. I mean, in non-diagonal minimal models, they can appear twice. But essentially, they appear a limited number of times, so that, and their characters are independent. Yeah. So.
Okay, are there further questions?
Yes.
I have a question. So you mentioned that CFTs are consistent if you just look at the sphere and the torus and these constraints. So what do you mean by consistent? Does that mean that on higher genera you don't obtain extra constraints for the CFT? Or does it just mean that it's a consistency check that your CFT is well defined?
Yeah. So your question is, whether consistency on the sphere and the torus implies consistency in higher genus. Well, actually, it does. I mean, it's a bit like for crossing symmetry, we just had to look at 4-point functions, and if the 4-point function was crossing symmetric, all n-point functions were consistent. And for higher genus, it's the same. If genus 1, if you have modular invariance of the 1-point function at genus 1, then basically this modular invariance gives you just enough geometric transformations if you want to deal with all extra handles you could add in higher genus.
Okay.
Yes?
How do you justify, when you define the character, you add this C, well, you subtract C over 24. How do you justify that?
Yeah, so
What's the standard definition of character?
yeah, so your question was why in the definition of the character I have this L0 minus C over 24. So I was trying to evade this question, but now that you ask it, I'm forced to give some more details. So basically, we want to construct our torus, well, from the plane, because originally let's say we defined this L0, this action of the Virasoro algebra locally, and we can especially well define it on the plane. So on the plane, we have a generator of dilations, which is L0 plus L0 bar, and a generator of rotations, which is I L0 minus L0 bar. So now from this plane, we should make a torus. And to begin with, we will make a cylinder. So let's say we have a complex coordinate z. Then we have to take log z as a coordinate. So log z goes to log z is a conformal transformation, but it has singularities. And the origin gets mapped to minus infinity in this torus. So this 0 on the plane. So here gets mapped to somewhere there, minus infinity. And this plus infinity of the plane gets mapped to this circle also at infinity on the torus. So this L0 plus L0 bar becomes essentially the translation in this direction on the torus. And this I L0 minus L0 bar becomes the rotation around the torus. However, I mean, this is a non-trivial conformal transformation. And the L0 transforms non-trivially. And it picks a term minus C over 12 here. So why is C appearing? Well, the reason basically is that the conformal transformation of L0 is determined by, if you want, how it interacts with the energy momentum tensor. So the energy momentum tensor has this OPE, T of y, T of z, which starts with a C over 2 here. So it means that if you want, if you take the zero model zero of this T, acting with this T tells you how it transforms by conformal transformations. And these conformal transformations will somehow depend on the central charge. And the precise dependence is that we pick this, for this particular conformal transformation, we pick this, this term. Okay, then we still have to take this cylinder and make it the torus. And to do that, we'll do some identification of, well, we'll first cut it at some finite distance and then identify. So in order to build a torus with an arbitrary modulus tau, we have to make a specific identification. So we have to here cut over a certain length, which is tau minus tau bar, I think, or maybe with an I factor. And here, at the same time, we have to rotate by an angle tau plus tau bar. So at the end, the partition function will be the trace of the operator which makes this identification. So essentially, tau plus tau bar times this rotation generator. And so I'm taking, yeah, let's write a formula that's clearer. So it's the trace of this operator, exponential 2 pi I tau plus tau bar times I L0 minus L0 bar. And then the operator that makes this translation, exponential, well, it's not 2 pi I, probably it's 2 pi, tau minus tau bar, L0 plus L0 bar, minus C over 12. And if modulo possible mistakes, it should coincide with the definition of the partition function. So then, if your partition function is defined with this subtraction of C over 12, of course, you want to define the characters with the same subtraction. Yeah. So sorry for the long answer.
Okay, I would suggest that we stop here. Maybe just a quick announcement now.